In the late 1800s, seafarers traveling along the coast of southern New Jersey near Little Egg Harbor looked to Tucker's Island Lighthouse for guidance through a particularly treacherous area of shoals. Large ships had been transporting goods here since the 1700s, and safe navigation was vital to the maritime economy. The lighthouse was built in 1868 on a thin strip of land known as Tucker's Island, home to one of New Jersey's first coastal resorts, complete with a life-saving station, a schoolhouse, 2 hotels, and over 70 cottages. The success of the resort faded by the 1920s, and life on Tucker's Island soon became no match for the encroachment of the sea. After a series of devastating nor'easters, Tucker's Island Lighthouse finally toppled into the ocean in October 1927. Reuben Tucker's dream in 1765 of a grand maritime resort on the edge of the sea had been washed away. By the 1950s, Tucker's Island itself disappeared. Some 70 years after its demise, the lighthouse has returned. It's the centerpiece of Tuckerton Seaport, a working village and museum dedicated to preserving the rich maritime heritage of the Jersey Shore and the unique contributions of its baymen. Each generation in Tuckerton has adapted to this environment to make the most of its natural resources, and so a distinct maritime culture has evolved. The seaport celebrates the labor and the daily life of years past. It embodies a spirit of how life once was on Barnegat Bay. The Barnegat Bay area is a patchwork of tidal creeks, marshes, and coastal inlets. For centuries, this environment has provided fish, shellfish, and migrating waterfowl with a great habitat for spawning and feeding. The plentiful resources first drew the native Lenape here, and Europeans began settling along the bay in the late 1600s. By the 1800s, improved boat construction and harvesting methods helped spur thriving commercial harvest industries. Clamming, oystering, waterfowling, and fishing, which in turn built towns like Tuckerton. Good harvests lasted several generations before times changed and once booming businesses disappeared. That way of life, the workaday life of the baymen, is the root of Tuckerton's maritime heritage. Tuckerton Seaport keeps the memory of the baymen alive by returning to that working tradition. Gus Heinrichs comes from a line of South Jersey boat builders. He's worked at the seaport building traditional Barnegat Bay boats, like the Heinrichs Sneak Box.
My dad was a professional boat builder. He could see a boat and he could build one, didn't need a set of patterns. And he came up with a set of patterns for this sneak box because he wanted to get one of the boys in his family to build boats, which he did.
Gus met a carpenter one day while clamming and started a 40-year career building houses instead of boats. A visit to the first annual Ocean County Decoy and Gunning Show at Tip Seaman Park changed his mind.
It was the first year that they were having it, and I was kind of interested in it myself. And somebody hollered, "Hey, Gus, you can't build a boat anyway," he said, "You're a house builder." And I didn't answer that right away, but I went right to work and entered a Barnegat Bay sneak box in the second year that the Tipsy and Decoy show was open. I never thought about anybody else's boat but the one I built, and my dad was responsible for the whole thing. It's a feather edge Barnegat Bay sneak box. The bottom of the boat is different, that'll accept an outboard motor on it, and they call it a planing hull. I had no problem selling that boat because of the way the boat travels and rides on the water. Building of the sneak boxes is something that started here in 1836, and we're still building the same boat today.
Joel Mott knows the Barnegat Bay area well, and his family has been living here for generations.
Physically, it's pretty much known as a shallow bay. There's a lot of sandbars. Navigating through Barnegat Bay is kind of tricky. Some of the boats in particular that were built here, you'll see special characteristics that were adapted just for a shallow area. Like a Garvey in particular, a flat bottom boat, which is an ideal Barnegat Bay boat because you can go just about anywhere. The Garvey's pretty interesting because it really evolved and changed with the times. Originally, when they were first made, around 1700 or so, they actually were a sailing vessel with a sail because it was before outboard motors. But because of the bay's shallowness, you had a flat bottom where you could kind of go over a sandbar and not get yourself really stuck too deep.
Garveys are still the craft of choice for today's clammers.
Mother Nature's not cooperating with us in the bay. I kind of think it's a combination of overdevelopment and a lot of our inlets and channels silting in, filling in, and the Army Corps can't do any dredging anymore. Lack of tide flow, and the clams need a proper tide flow to feed and reproduce. So clam population dwindling. Well, my family goes back about 3 or 4 generations, and now my son is 4th generation. We're trying to continue the operation, but it's getting harder and harder as time progresses. Majority of the people in this area made their living off of the bay in one way or another. Scallops, oysters, clams. These were all seasonal type things that these people did. Well, I've never done anything else. Kind of feel responsible to hold my end up here. But I wouldn't have it any other way as for myself. I love the bay, love the water, and probably would be here the rest of my life. Hopefully Mother Nature will come around and, you know, what's 100 years in our lifetime, so it may change someday.
A lot of the industry is focused on the resources available. In the bay itself, there was things like shellfish, clams, oysters, things that you could harvest for food. Also, there was ducks. Market duck hunting was another way that you could make a living from the area. The thing that helped that would be some of the other natural resources that went along with it, some of the products like white cedar or timber, so you could build boats to get out into the water, so they really worked hand in hand.
Harvest industries depended on well-built boats. And so boat building flourished. Boat builders evolved into craftsmen, relying on traditional patterns, but also fine-tuning their designs to suit new demands.
My grandfather came over from the old country. Edward, nicknamed Sock, S-O-C-K, Heinrichs. Everybody knew and called him Sock. They landed in New York, and this is about as far as they got down here in New Jersey. He was in the boat business, like repairing more so than building new ones, but I know he built a lot of new ones along with it. My grandfather started the business, and I had 4 uncles, and they were all involved with the Sax-Heinrich Railway. They all worked there and helped my grandfather run the business. My grandfather's yard was located right here adjacent to the seaport. There's still some traces of it, like the old railway tracks.
The Heinrichs Boatworks may one day return to this site. Future seaport projects include a recreation of the Boatworks building.
They had water going right up to the meadow edge, and then they had a house built over top of it. You could actually run the boat right inside, staying on the water, and you had a roof over your head.
Originally, boat work in Tuckerton meant maintaining large coastal transport ships. By the late 1800s, coastal shipping had been surpassed by the railroad, and the boat industry changed. Boat builders began supplying new, smaller boats for commercial harvests. The abundance of white cedar in the area, a superior material for handcrafted boats, made construction economical, and the product sturdy and valuable. Boat builders adapted throughout the 20th century as local industries changed and harvesting gave way to recreation.
The catboat was another really traditional working boat. Traditionally, they were used for dredging oysters, for transportation, for moving things from one end of the bay to the other. As time progressed and they weren't used so much for work, they started to use them more for recreation. One of the things that's still going on today is they're racing the A-Cats, which is like a racing catboat, a really beautiful thing to see them coming out of the water and sailing across the bay.
Sailing an A-Cat is definitely unique. The fact that it has 605 square feet of sail and it has a boom the length of the boat. The boom's 28 feet, the boat's 28 feet. So needless to say, the A-Cat is overpowered. The A-Cat was designed to sail in Barnegat Bay or shallow water. So therefore it's real beamy and it doesn't draw a lot of water. With the centerboard up, it only draws 1.5 feet. They were made of local materials. The hull is of Jersey white cedar. It sits on white oak frames. It has an oak keel. It had a mahogany centerboard, mahogany rudder, and a Sitka spruce mast and boom. The A-Cats that we know of now, the Barnegat Bay A-Cats, the first one was built in 1922, and it was built to win the Toms River Challenge Cup. The Toms River Challenge Cup's been sailed for since 1871. This is definitely a East Coast boat. This boat, the Barnegat Bay A-Cat, was designed just for racing.
Some traditional boat building continues, despite the changing times. The Heinrichs Sneak Box remains a dependable duck hunting boat. Around Barnegat Bay, a sneak box handcrafted by Gus Heinrichs carries a lasting appeal.
My first boat was a Barnegat Bay sneak box built by my dad, and we had no power at that time. You used a pair of oars. Wherever you wanted to go, you rowed. There was nothing to row 2 or 3 miles, and it was a very enjoyable trip. For me, it was anyway. The boat's used for basically the same thing it was used for many, many years ago. It's used for duck hunting. You get out there in a hurry with that outboard motor on there, so you can go out and duck hunt for an hour and zoom right back, put the boat away, and the man's on the job by 8:30, 9 o'clock. Growing up around here was probably a lot less hustle bustle than we have today. Way back then, if you wanted to go duck hunting or something like that, you just took off and went. You didn't have to worry about whom was going to give you the dickens, I guess, when you came back in. You wanted to go out there and stay for 3 or 4 hours, stay there 3 or 4 hours. Staying there meaning like using one of these boats and going out duck hunting.
Well, the traditions of duck hunting in this area go back a couple hundred years. Personally, I've been hunting for about 45 years, and some things have changed over the years, but the basic boat style that we're using today is a Barnegat Bay sneak box, a feather edge. It's a boat that was designed specifically for this area to hide in the sedges. I think you could see today that it does hide very well, and you're able to have the ducks come in rather closely to you. Generally, they're about 12 foot in length, very low profile, which is one of the biggest things that help hide from ducks. You can put it right next to the bank, grass it up, and become almost invisible. Another advantage to the sneak box is the spray shield in front. Made of canvas, and you can either leave it up, take it down at your convenience, and it's great for in rough weather. That'll shed a lot of the water. The old timers, when they designed this, really knew what they were doing, and this design still works great today. In the old days, when they would commercially hunt ducks to sell to the market, there were a lot of different methods used. They had guns that at one time they used to actually mount on the front of the boat, and they would load their shells with nails and screws and anything that they could find. People didn't know better, and the skies were blackened with ducks, and we thought that it would last forever. Certainly come to find out that you have to take care of the resource today. And I think most of the duck hunters today agree that that's the way it should be. The families in the area in Port Republic and Leeds Point go back generations, and hunting has just been a tradition. At one time, I'm sure, a necessity, but just a tradition that has been handed down over the generations, and people love it and are active in it in this area.
The boat building industry declined as the commercial harvest industries disappeared, and handcrafted wood boats yielded to fiberglass. The maritime tradition remains strong around Barnegat Bay nonetheless, and Tuckerton Seaport celebrates that in many ways.
In their memory, I christened this boat.
A boat launch is one such celebration. The seaport is known for being a great place from which to launch, especially for Barnegat Bay boats. People here appreciate the lasting significance of launching a new craft built in the traditional way. The seaport also hosts an annual Bayman Boat Parade, where local boat owners decorate their craft and cruise down Tuckerton Creek. The boats in the parade don't need to be historically significant or traditional. The emphasis here is on bringing the community together to celebrate boats. It's about keeping maritime culture alive. Boating events reconnect local people to their past and make new connections between the generations.
I got it.
Okay, keep doing that until it comes right up there. Can't miss. As we have the classic boat show, we also have what's called a family day. It's a kind of a prearranged kit that we put together, and we build boats. We, meaning father and son, mother and daughter, or grandfather and grandson. And we put assistance with everyone if they want help to put the boats together.
Okay. And then just put it to there. Yep. Correct.
The spirit of the bay is still alive at the seaport. Each generation comes back to celebrate the maritime culture, however far removed they are from the days of booming harvests and handmade boats. That spirit includes a respect for the natural resources of the sea and a recognition of how the coastal environment has been the key to the community. Craftspeople who still use traditional methods and tools have also found a home at the seaport. Their work brings the past alive for a new generation.
Gotta take this. Okay, that's it. This. Hold it here. Okay, we'll start. Okay, that's it.
The heyday of the Barnegat Bay duck hunters spawned a generation of decoy carvers. Like area boat builders, these carvers used local resources: white cedar. They also designed their decoys to meet the needs and methods of the area. The original baymen hunted ducks in great numbers to supply both local restaurants and the markets of New York and Philadelphia, in addition to feeding their families. Every spring and fall, waterfowl would migrate through, stopping to feed in Barnegat Bay's marshes along the way. Hunters lay in their sneak boxes, surrounded by decoys. An accurate, realistic set of decoys meant better hunting. As the harvest numbers began to fall, baymen gave up on commercial harvesting and became guides for wealthy businessmen keen on testing themselves in the wilds of the bay's marshes. Well-made decoys were an important part of the baymen's business. Today, these original carvers are hailed as heroes. Their craftsmanship in the world of work is now recognized as an art form. Decoy carving by hand continues, keeping this strong artistic tradition alive. Few people around the Barnegat Bay live the complete life of the bayman anymore, but many share some aspect of that life. From a family tradition of hunting or fishing, to a keen interest in the old tools as newfound folk treasures. It's something in the blood that makes these seemingly forgotten ways of life appealing. It's the spirit of the bay.
The term bayman really refers to someone who makes a living from the bay or who makes a living out of the resources around him. As you go through the Tuckerton Seaport, you're going to see a lot of connections, a lot of links from today to the past.
When we're wood carving, we always carve with the grain. Now, in the front of the duck, it's against the grain, so if I try to carve up here, the tool doesn't work because it's against the grain. Somewhere in the middle, the grain turns around, and I can carve, and the tool works very well.
A lot of the buildings that you see at the Tuckerton Seaport are buildings that have been recreated from a picture or from an idea of something that was here before, which is no longer here. To give you a window into the past to see what life might have been like.
Decoys are one such link to the past. The original baymen saw the duck decoy as an important piece of work equipment, like a boat or a clamming rake. Today, they're treasured as lasting tributes to another era.
One of the important things that we've really worked at kind of bringing alive today at the Seaport is kind of a link to the past.
You would stand on the side like that, put this down into the water, and just squish them together.
Things that were once part of it in everyday life, which you don't really see so much anymore in this area. Things like building boats, repairing boats, carving decoys, the shellfish industry. Some things that one time really an ingrained part of everyday life here down at the shore that has kind of slipped away. And that's what we try to do at the Seaport, is keep that kind of stuff alive, kind of show people what life once was like.
It is said that the coast is shifting once again. In recent years, low tides have allowed Tucker's Island to re-emerge, if only briefly, as a sandbar.
And there were many good times on this place called Tucker's Island. That is, until the wind and the waves ripped its sands and tore the isle apart. One by one, the buildings fell like castles in the sand. The lighthouse, the schoolhouse, then the Coast Guard stand. Now you know by 1950 there was not a trace of land, not a sign of Tucker's Island. And the 1990s saw our isle back on the rise. From Holgate you can see it rising with the flowing tide. You can hunt and fish and swim there as you watch the seagulls fly o'er the rise of Tucker's Island. 'Cause the winds they ripped and tore up the shore, and Tucker's Island just is not there anymore. Now it sits beneath the ocean, holding memories by the score of a time when there was a place.
Like the new Tucker's Island light, the spirit of the bay has found a new home.
Tucker's Island, Tucker's Island, Tucker's Island, Tucker's Island.